Welcome back to the Collaborative Canvas, where conversation sparks revolution. Today, we are diving deep into the evolving frontier of AI, not just generating insights, but transforming and translating them into the real world action. Joining me is Frank Pica, the visionary CEO and the co founder of NativeAI, a man who's been whispering sweet nothings to AI long before it became mainstream. From scaling machine learning companies to a nine-figure exit to working on an emotional intelligence for humanoid, Frank has been at the epicenter where AI meets human potential. Together, we will explore how AI is choosing loops between insights and action, how it shapes the future of humanoids, and even how it might build the next generation of the physical products. So, buckle up. And before we start, just ensure that you have subscribed to the button by pressing that subscribe button to the Collaborative Canvas podcast. And you're not missing any of those forthcoming episodes around AI market research, consumer insights, personal branding, and sales management. Because this one is not just about the future, we are just starting it up. So it's about how the future is happening now. So let's dive in. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you. And Cash, pleasure to be here. Very excited with the topic and heck, what an exciting time for everyone in this area.
So, Frank, let's start by saying, you've been into the AI space for quite a while now. How about you just, delve with the things that you have actually experienced over a period of time? And,
Sure.
let's talk about, how you've seen the changes so far and how this is actually bridging the entire gap. What has actually changed? So, a bit of background about, who you are, how you evolved, and what is native AI. And then we talk about how AI is actually bridging the gap at this point of time.
Great. Yeah. So really the story kind of began for me back in 2011, 2012. I was part of a founding team working on a machine learning startup and almost purely focused on advertising. The technology itself was fantastic, right? It was light years better in terms of ROI for those in the market that wanted to reach people with great products that they were selling. But it had its limitations, and certainly from a flexibility perspective, it was not quite there as a technology, right? Machine learning is pretty rigid, typically built more like a vertical fashion or towards a use case. And I would say the other big piece was that natural language couldn't properly be interpreted, scaled, or understood. And given how much of marketing and advertising is involved in simply connecting with the human on the other end, natural language is a big piece of that. So that quickly shifted into exploring what I would classify as more true artificial intelligence today, which led me to another fantastic organization founded by a gentleman named Julian called Add You Like. And so Add You Like was again in that same vein, an advertising technology company working with some of like the largest Fortune 500 businesses around the globe. So it was actually a Paris headquartered business. But one of the most brilliant things that honestly came out of that experience, and had the luxury of leading their entire North America expansion and US business, was we partnered with IBM Watson. And I know people hear IBM Watson today, and almost they're not even in the conversation half the time, right? With Gen AI. But what was truly novel at that time is they were one of the first using natural language processing as kind of an easy to use technology. And we were one of the first businesses to actually take the technology and turn it into a true industry application. And so we were using that to understand content online at scale, and it was quite fascinating. I would say it was far from perfect. In fact, things like sentiment or understanding semantics were quite limiting in a lot of ways for the technology. But it was really showing those like first signs of glimmer or hope on like what the technology will become. And so that just from a technology leap perspective, going from machine learning to natural language processing to now where we're at today with large language models, and a much deeper kind of general, artificial intelligence. It's leaps and bounds different. And I can give you a little more color as well about like what we've seen over the last 6 years here at Native AI, but over the last, decade plus, right? Those are some, I would say, transformational leaps that we've seen in the technology that are really helping businesses today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke, by far how native AI is actually helping out. So again, glimpse of the thought that we mentioned, that it is no more about consumer insights. It's just not about finding insights. It's more about helping business take action on them. And as you mentioned, what is that the important thing that you think is tying up with the real ROI? Because people are now using AI, and there's still skepticism around how AI versus the actual human. We talk about
Mhm.
humanoids, if you remember. Uh, I wanted to understand, that how people can derive the real ROI from those conversations that they're having, and how native AI is approaching those insights around it.
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal question. Taking a step back and looking at use case and ROI, to your point, the goalpost has just moved dramatically forward, right? And I think most of this actually centers around one general theme, and that's hyper personalization. Our expectations around personalization 10 years ago when we would get, a hat or a shirt with our name stitched on it, right? Like that was kind of magical and right, that was a premium product. Now personalization for businesses means like something dramatically different. And the layers, right? If we look at humans as an onion, we have infinite amount of layers. And really what the technology's allowed us to do and allowed business to do is understand some of those like deeper emotional convictions and triggers that drive true personalization. And I'll give you a parallel. I was just in Los Angeles and Hollywood, meeting with some of like the largest, media companies in the world. And they used movies and film, right, as like one of the most like nuanced forms of personalization. And at first I didn't quite get it. But then I thought about myself during a movie, right? Whether it makes you laugh or if you're a crier, right? You're watching a movie and it makes you cry. It's not necessarily that they had an insight on, Ankesh or Frank, right? On like what exactly to make you cry. It's something like deeper down in, our soul or our mind. And
Emotions.
emotions, right? And for the first time in quite some time, I think we're really starting to understand that at scale. And that's one of the most like beautiful pieces of this technology is it goes several layers deeper to a form of personalization that's really never been seen before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why synthetic data has been roaring recently, because people are talking about digital twins, using of the, different models, using of the GANs, and still trying to understand it human intelligence. But at some point of time, when I hear people talking about human intelligence, they still see, not everything can be trained, can be modeled, and hence it is still, say, 70% accuracy is considered as 100% accuracy.
Yeah, I talk with companies all the time about how do we measure something like accuracy or start to judge like the validity of, AI. And it's probably one of the toughest questions to really answer, right? Like, what's the proper way to do it? And so I think it also should be looked at from a lens of, perspective from a business or perspective for consumer use. Like, what is the actual objective? And so I'll give you an example that we used last week. Um, I could show you today, right, whether a digital twin or a humanoid has parity with humans. And if I showed you that that parity was very closely aligned, my digital twins said A, and then I ran that same question past humans and they also said A, you would start to trust the technology a little bit, right? There would be some alignment between the artificial intelligence response and the actual human's response to that question. But my next question to you would be as a business owner, right? Or as an executive, what outcome are you seeking? Because companies have for years been doing market research and using human responses to drive products. And it does show some dividends and it does show ROI. But then there's also that very glaring stat of 95% of new products fail in market. And so, do I think it's the most critical thing that something like digital twin technology or artificial intelligence has exact parity for a business? The answer is actually no. I don't think that is the leading indicator of success. It very well could be that the artificial intelligence response actually provokes a greater business outcome than what a human response would have. So I'm leaving some room for the unknown, right, of what may happen. But I do think things like alignment with humans is a great ambition. And I think it's a good starting point for measurement or validity, but I'm not sure it's the end goal, depending on the objective for the user.
Makes sense. And you spoke about humanoids. I mean, couple of conversation even we had before this, you talked about, the role of AI in enabling humanoids. So, from your work with, digital twins and those critical emotional intelligence that we've been talking about, what is and how this is actually critical to a certain extent in closing that gap between humans and machines?
Yes, I think the greatest example, a heck of a founder and already shaping up to be like an incredible business is Figure. They're one of the hottest robotics companies out there. They've raised, hundreds of millions of dollars. They're making very impressive leaps in terms of not only technology but capability. But in a recent interview, he mentioned this as well around humanoids. And so they already have contracts with BMW, large enterprises where robotics and humanoids will be used to essentially do a lot of the work that humans either find dangerous in a factory or mundane, perhaps, but still nuanced and requires some type of human-like, what would you call it? Feeling, looking, touching. And so his next point was simply, if we ever wanted to put a robot in someone's house without it being scary, right, or provoking fear, we have to nail down the actual emotional piece of that. And I think we could look at robotics and a very similar lens that we look at film. If a robot cannot connect with us on an emotional level, or perhaps it provokes the wrong type of emotion, such as fear, what would be the likely adoption of the technology in a household, right? To help you do chores or help watch your kids, God forbid. And so humanoids being acceptable, right, at scale and to the general masses, it was pretty much made clear that in order for that to happen, you first have to nail down, do they have proper emotional intelligence, right? And could they connect with us on a level that would be deep enough or deemed appropriate to actually keep them in the house? And so it's almost like having a pet, right? And if your dog bites everyone, you're likely to probably get rid of that pet because it would be unacceptable. But if it comes up and it gives you a kiss or a lick, right? Much more acceptable pet. Similar thing happening with humanoids and robotics. So I don't know. I think it's a fascinating challenge, but one again for that to scale to the masses, one that needs to be addressed.
I mean, I think I was just thinking about the recent experience I had with the robots. As I was at a Singapore Changi airport, and the restaurant servings were happening through the robots. So, not talking about the emotional intelligence that probably would have not fed into those robots' processor or the memory units, but at least they know exactly where to deliver what. And I was like, I think technology is taking its own shape in its own way. Things would happen over a period of time, but not today, I guess. I mean, I think emotional intelligence is something, as you mentioned. I mean, with a pet, if they're biting, then of course, we get rid of them. But considering, you mentioned a couple of examples here, talking about that, episode that you've heard, talking about those other examples you mentioned. There have been multiple lessons that you probably would have learned over a period of time, working. And something that I personally feel when I'm actually, creating my own company, there is a lot of experience that I've been actually getting, and they are becoming my lessons as well. So, what lessons have you learned from working with humanoids companies that apply broadly to AI development today, and especially how these AI can become more human in understanding um, or the interactions, or probably the way we see the example that you just cited. Let's have a little bit of your lessons being applied to that.
Sure. Yeah, one thing, I would critique and one thing that we've experienced about certain areas, right, where innovation is extremely high. And so you look at Silicon Valley, you look at areas like San Francisco, happens here in New York as well, is we all have like really great ambitions, and rightfully so. But when we get to a point when we're talking about humanoids or robotics, we have to realize that the technology has impact, and that's usually the goal, globally to every single human and person on this earth. And so I think there's a certain sense of morality, right, and ethics that really does need to be maintained, especially at this level of innovation that we're discussing here on the show. Um, the internet is one thing, right? And we've seen where that's gone haywire. Things like social media impacting, the way that kids feel at school, or people being harassed in online forums. Think about that levels of magnitudes deeper with something like robotics and humanoids being an actual physical, talking, thinking object that could even physically hurt you. And so, one thing, again, I've learned, whether it's robotics or humanoids, or whether it's just artificial intelligence in general, is again, we have to keep that morality and understand that, like, we cannot just instantly replace people, right, with technology, and nor should that, I would say, be the focus, unless those people are in harm's way, right? And this robot can augment or kind of like help them. And so that's, I would probably say, the biggest learning lesson. And while it may slow down the adoption of an innovation, I truly think it's the right way, right? Because without us, what's the point of the innovation in the first place?
Do you think robots in future can take surveys?
I would say that's already confirmed. I think the better question is, does it actually yield a better result, right? Or does it actually like help us in some way? And so, yes, they can absolutely take surveys. I think it should be transparent when that happens. Shouldn't hide it. But more ideally is like, is that for some reason better than humans taking surveys? And if the answer is yes, then I think it's a fantastic thing. It gives us more data to work with and create better products, services for each other.
And Frank, I remember one of the conversation we had previously. You mentioned that AI has been moving from insight generation to product building. A lot of conversations that we are recently having about product concept testing around synthetic data as well. Of course, that's our core offerings. But product testing is not limited to just few insights. It's a deeper insight. So, what are those early examples that you are seeing when AI is not just ideating, but actually constructing the physical product?
So another fun thing from this week out in Hollywood. I can't say the companies, but I'll use a metaphor here. Have you ever seen the film Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember the scene when John Hammond, right? He's the owner of Jurassic Park, takes everyone into the lab, and there's the little DNA strand that pops up on the video. You can think of synthetic data being a lot like the DNA strand. So in other words, they had an incomplete strand of DNA, right, that they were trying to reconstruct to then create a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Um, they had to fill the gaps in that DNA strand with frog DNA, for those who may not remember the premise of the film. But with that insert of the frog DNA to complete the DNA strand, they were then able to build essentially a product, and that product was dinosaur. That's actually kind of like what's going on in a lot of ways with AI, and like kind of the difference between something like synthetic data, which is almost a raw material. It's a fuel. It's a piece of lumber, right? It never builds the house by itself. To actually completing like a whole system of, or an actual utility and platform, which would be something more like a digital twin, right? Or again, a synthetic respondent. And so I always wanted to make that clear. I think that's probably one of the most fascinating things, is like, what is the role right now, right? And like, how does it work? Well, synthetic data alone is simply a commodity. And in order to make it useful for enterprise technologists like yourself, right? And many that you interview, we have to like actually turn it into something. And that something for many people could be a digital twin that has enormous impact to the way that they do business and transform industry. So I think that's actually one of the biggest ways that something like synthetic data and AI are kind of like working in tandem to fill in knowledge gaps, but then ultimately do like really cool things like create physical products or digital products that synthetic data or just the data itself as a raw material just like couldn't do. So that leap has probably been the single-handed most exciting thing I've seen, because to your point, we've said these words and this phrase for quite some time, insight to action, but we've always relied on another team, another human to do that action. That luckily, I think is going away, right? Where we're truly bridging that gap between now the insight that we've just produced can create me that new CPG product. It can create me that new ad. And all of that kind of seamlessness and integration between those workflows is what's going to cause, a huge accelerant to like things like hyper personalization, whether that is physical products or whether that is something as simple as the ad actually talks to me, right? And I may be in a segment with a lot of other people that look like me, but it's talking directly to Frank, right? In a capacity that's like never been seen before.
Yeah, and I can visualize a few ads that I've recently seen, which has the hyper personalization at a peak, where
Mhm.
you probably believe that this product is being meant for you. Though it's still a physical product, you have to go and buy it, but that connects you well. And I think that's where the human intelligence is actually working with the emotional intelligence, because that's where my emotions are getting connected with that product, and which is more of a reason I'm actually buying it. So I think
I
that
love it.
that's wonderful, and that's a great example. But when we were talking about humanoid, Frank, I was actually thinking about Will Smith movie iRobot.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and the examples that you were citing, somebody sitting next to you, probably like you itself in a humanoid way, and you're talking to each other together. So that's what I resonated. The things that you mentioned about how things will be, how things have been so far and how things will be. So let's take 5 years ahead from today. Now, why I'm saying 5 years? Because again, it's the same thought came to my mind when we started discussing about synthetic data. You said you already started this 6 years ago. Now,
Mhm.
6 years ago and today, and then we are looking at 5 years ahead of the time today. Do you envision a world where businesses can ideate, prototype, produce mass products using just AI alone? And what are those ethical or societal consideration we should be start preparing ourselves for?
Believe it is 100% possible. I actually believe that's possible today, from a technology, even a logistics perspective. Whether or not it should be done, I think is the bigger question. Who would be at fault, right? There has to be some type of accountability to your point, from an ethical perspective. If, God forbid, AI creates a product and one of the ingredients in that product leads to cancer. Today, we've seen corporate shields kind of protect people from that even, and that's already hard to swallow, right? But if we have AI in the layer, who are we blaming, right? So I think that's probably the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is it's not if it's possible, it's whether or not it should truly be done without a human in the loop. Now, does a human need to be in the loop on everything? I don't also believe in that as, I think there's a balance there. And I also believe the tolerance for where that line sits on human in the loop will continue to change as we get more comfortable with AI basically aligning with their own ethics and morality, right? And so we'll kind of see like where those, I guess, lines are crossed or that envelope is pushed before humans start to say, hey, this has gone too far. We need to reel it back in. So just like any other technology or innovation that's presented itself through our lifetimes, right? Our parents' lifetimes and our grandparents before them, you're going to continue to see that line be pushed. But I think it's a very good thing in a lot of ways. And I think it can be a very scary thing in certain industries. And hopefully the regulators do their job, right, to understand where those lines should essentially sit. And then also like what types of industries really should require human in the loop. Whereas industries that maybe aren't dangerous or potentially harmful for us, right, can be much more efficient just through AI automation.
So considering imagining a graph, where do we
Mm.
sit? We are going upwards, or we're in the middle of going upwards. Of course, there's no downfall as such. We're just starting up.
Yeah. I think we are kind of like the Titanic, not in a negative way, right? But in terms of like, man, we just barely tipped the iceberg. There's many people that have documented this probably better than I will articulate it right now. But every time we see an exciting technology, even Gen AI, which has shown, I would say, near immediate ROI, right? Measurable ROI. The fun stuff is yet to come, right? Like
Yeah.
it's the technology, we've only been hitting the low-hanging fruit stuff, like the obvious to us now, not what is, actually novel with the technology and essentially what it can do 5 years from now. So yeah, I would say we're at the very tip of the iceberg. I think the nice part is that tip of the iceberg has been able to be measured and it's had enormous impact already. But yeah, I think this is 100 times bigger than the internet in a lot of ways. I truly do.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that brings us to an electrifying conversation with Frank Pica today. A journey through the evolving landscape where AI doesn't just think, but it acts. And from empowering business with true ROI driven insights to imagining a world where emotionally intelligent humanoids can become part of our daily lives, this possibility seems endless and truly exciting. Thank you, Frank, for sharing this incredible vision and experience. And to our listeners, if today's conversation sparked new ideas or questions, then just don't keep it to yourself. Reach out, share your thoughts, and continue to dialogue. Until next time, keep pushing your boundaries and painting your own canvas of innovation. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you, Akash. Honestly, you're amazing. Love watching you. Do your
Thank
thing,
you.
man.
Yeah.
Cool.